excited to be presenting this program, Risk Management with Connie Manis. Tonight is our first of 5 sessions. It's the introduction to risk management. I am Jen Plowden. I'm with the Land Trust Alliance, and we are super happy that you are joining us tonight. This is a really important program at the Alliance. Our goals as an organization are really to help you protect more land, to build your organization's capacity to elevate land conservation nationwide, and to defend the land trust community from threats. And so we're really happy to be working with Connie and Rebecca at the Connecticut Land Conservation Council to bring this to you. And I also wanted to just thank our sponsor, the PCLB Foundation, whose underwriting of the Alliance makes all of this possible. So welcome. And just a couple housekeeping things. I think most of you have renamed yourselves with your name and your organization, but that's really helpful to us, especially since there are a few new faces. We're going to be chatting with each other a fair bit. So please make sure you know where your mute button is so that you can come off of mute and be part of that interactive those interactive components. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to Connie to get us started.
Sure. Well, thanks, Jen. We had initially hoped that we would be able to come off of the screen sharing and let everyone see each other and actually go around the room popcorn style so that you could introduce yourselves, because I don't know all of you, and I really hope that I have the opportunity at some point to get to know each and every one of you one-on-one. But I think that what we were going to hope to do just to jump off this program is to give you a chance to meet each other. And so, as I had posted in chat, it would be very helpful for me to know who you are and what your role is at your land trust and what you hope to get out of this program. So over the course of tonight, if you don't mind sharing that in the chat. But I think just to kick us off, Rebecca was going to put us in breakout rooms, just 2 people apiece, and spend a minute or two just saying hello to your neighbor. It's a random thing, so chances are you're going to get somebody who you don't know. If you're lucky enough to get somebody who you're already friends with, then ask them how their weekend went. So Rebecca, if you don't mind doing that, and we'll just spend 3 to 5 minutes and then come on back. Just to give me a chance to meet you, I'm Connie Manis. I am coming at you from Kent, Connecticut this evening. My work includes both the practical aspect of boots on the ground work at a land trust as the executive director of the Kent Land Trust, which is an accredited land trust, as well as advisory and supportive working contacts as the director/coordinator of the Litchfield Hills Greenprint Collaborative, which is a regional conservation partnership of about 33 conservation organizations in Northwest Connecticut, and also as a consultant for the Land Trust Alliance, CLCC, and others, particularly in the areas of organizational capacity building and land trust accreditation. And what I hope to get out of this program is the opportunity to discuss with you all of the unique aspects of our work with land trusts, some of the risks associated with that work, and strategies for thinking more deeply about whether and how to avoid or address those risks to better ensure desirable outcomes. So I'm not sure how many of you were with us on the information session a week or so back, but our first slide is a bit of a review just to get us into it. And we're going to define risk in these sessions at the organizational level as the threat or opportunity, really the possibility that a future event or action. Sorry, I'm getting a beep in. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up.
It's a little bit, for some, I think some folks are having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. If you could maybe see if you can move a little bit closer to the microphone, that might help.
I'm gonna also just quickly add, if it's okay, because I know I'm having a little bit of a lag here and I'm hardwired into the internet, that if you are having a little bit of a lag on your end, you may want to turn off your video for the time being.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay, great. So I'm not sure that I got all the way through the sentence. The risk is the threat or possibility that a future event or action may be different from what the leaders of an organization expect and may adversely or beneficially affect an organization's ability to achieve its mission and objectives. So there's a possibility of loss and a possibility of gain, or a possibility of gain are both functions that relate to risk. But most people think about risks in terms of threats. There are 3 dimensions to risk, 2 of which exist along continuums. And so the likelihood of a certain thing happening, is one of the dimensions. So a given outcome could be not at all likely, very likely, or fall somewhere in between. And that outcome or others related to it could happen very rarely or frequently or somewhere in between. The next dimension is magnitude, that the impact of the outcome could range from little to large. And the third dimension is really one way, not so much an either or on the continuum, but that usually risks are that things could be good or that things could be bad. Risk management is a discipline for coping with that uncertainty. It's a methodical way of assessing our risks using the dimensions of likelihood, magnitude, and direction. Proactive risk management allows you to seize opportunities as well as limit damage. So depending on our risk tolerance, our risk appetite, or our threshold, risk management involves taking steps, again, along a continuum to either eliminate or completely avoid risk, or more frequently to mitigate the likelihood of the risk or the magnitude of the risk, or both the likelihood and the magnitude. It gets a little geeky here, but I really like the graphics that I've got here that kind of show how you start to analyze risk depending on where things fall on, in the different dimensions of magnitude, likelihood, and direction. And on the positive, I guess, flip side, risk management steps would include, instead of avoiding risk, fully embracing an opportunity or doing this with thought to the likelihood of the desired outcome, or to increase the degree to which the outcome is positive. So an example of how this actually works, because it's pretty abstract, how this might apply in a real life situation at your land trust would be maybe your new property has like a killer view from a cliff that kind of comes up fast and might be a little bit dangerous. So if you were completely risk avoidant, you would route the trail to completely avoid the view and take people away from that danger. Or you might take the trail to the view, but install warning signage and design the trail so that the cliff is maximally visible. Or, and actually it's really an and, you might also purchase property liability insurance for the situation where somebody falls off that cliff. And then on the positive side, if you wanted to play this out, maybe there's a grant application and you want to apply, right? So you could fully embrace the risk, go all in, do whatever you need to do in order to get the money. Or if you want to think about, how to mitigate, how to deal with some of the risks that are associated here, you would look at past grantees, you would look at what kind of funding they got, and you would configure your application and the effort that you put into it accordingly, right? So, you wouldn't necessarily spend days upon days applying for a $500 grant, grant. But if you found out that it was, a grant for which the grantees usually got $500,000, and this was something that was very important to your land trust, you would invest more resources. You would ask for the funding that, was commensurate with those resources that you were expending, and you would go the extra 9 yards. Okay. I really like this rubric to help us think about the different places on the spectrum that risk can live based on the dimensions. And this is from a webinar presented by Lori Barrett of the Terra Firma Conservation Defense Program in 2020, which is one of the resources that we will be providing you with later on today. And you can see here that, this is a rubric that categorizes risks into A, B, C, and D based on where they fall on the grid that contains the two functions of the impact or the magnitude and the likelihood of that risk occurring. And category A risks have a high likelihood of happening and a high level of impact. And those are the risks to focus on and really do something about. In other words, it's worth your while to exercise some control to either make these things happen or not happen. Category B risks have a high impact, but are unlikely. So for these, it might not be worthwhile expending a lot of resources, but it might make sense to think about what you would do in the event that this risk came to pass, or in the event that it became more likely to happen. And so that's where that word monitor comes in, because you're really going to keep an eye on this just to make sure that your risk isn't increasing and moving from B to A. Category C risks have a high likelihood, but a low impact. And here it will make sense to manage these if possible, but not with extensive expenditures. More like practical solutions to avoid the risk, or at least the negative consequence from that. People who are, let's go back to the trail scenario. People leaving a trail because of an attraction like a view or a waterfall or a cliff, but maybe potentially leading to confusion as to where the trail goes, because you get everybody's little trail here and there, tramping down the woods. You can't find your trail anymore. Maybe there's some infrastructure destroyed. Here it would make sense to do some management to make clearer where the trail is and install signage advising against people leaving the trail. Category D risks have a low impact and a low likelihood of happening. And I think of these as being in the category of like revisit. Maybe something like there's occasional dumping on a property that you own. Something where, maybe putting up some signs, or occasionally a trail camera will deal with the problem. And in fact, it might be okay to just live with and accept these risks because they're so infrequent and don't have a huge impact. But if things change, you're going to, again, monitor. And if things change and the impact increases, they might move up to be in other categories. So embracing risk management as a discipline to protect the land trust assets involves understanding basic risk management terms and concepts, learning to recognize and evaluate the risks with a special eye to what our organizations do, recognizing our potential risk management roles in our work with organizations, and then formulating practical risk management plans and strategies that are suited to our unique circumstances in our organizations, our current operations, and our long-term goals. And one additional way to approach this work, I know this is really wonky, guys, is by looking at how to organize one's analysis. And there are these three common approaches that I list out on this slide. So a goal-oriented approach focuses on the specific goals that the land trust is trying to achieve through risk management, whether that be better financial controls or improved ability to defend the properties. Okay, those are two examples. A program component approach focuses on identifying the core components of a potential program and developing each component in turn. So this is the kind of thing where perhaps your board committees could each analyze risk in their specific areas. And then the third approach, a process approach, is a risk management program as a series of steps that forms a perpetual loop. Maybe something where each year, for example, you take stock, look at what happened that was expected, what was unexpected, maybe progress or achievement towards certain goals not met, and retooling your plan as necessary. And we'll play more with these concepts in our final session, but what's important to know now is that these tools are there to help you assess your risk, both your opportunities and your obstacles, And then once you know your risks, you can better assess what your response could be and determine your short-term action steps needed. All right, one more slide like this. And, really this is about awareness all the time and a lens to kind of always keep on. Hence the words discipline, practice that we've been using tonight. So your ongoing examination, whether or not you become a risk expert, could include some of the following questions and reflections in your board service and questions that your board should be thinking about and answering regularly. So these questions include risk-taking questions. What big risks are worth taking this year to advance our mission? And I see the potential for this, particularly in the programming area. We're kind of on new ground in land trust, and it feels really good, but very new and unfamiliar. So what do we need to help us step forward into that work? A risk landscape question. What mission-related risks are starting to emerge on our horizon, and what additional information do we need to understand and act? And for me, this is the changing climate, right, is the big burning one here. And we're all learning about climate resilience and mitigation and how important our protected lands are and our ongoing protection is with regard to this. Lemonade from lemons. What seeds of opportunity exist in the risks we fear most, right? So where is there opportunity in adversity? Could perhaps the threat of funding cutbacks or having a bad year compel our organizations to maybe develop different business models? What's going to grow out of some of the challenges that we've faced over the last year and a half, 2 years? Using a progressive lens, so building dimension around risk analysis. It's not really a flat snapshot in time question. It is work that is informed by your past experience and by ongoing events, and it requires revisiting and retooling. Risk oversight is the board contributing to a shared understanding of the organization's top risks, right? What is the board's role in doing this work, and what is their responsibility? Lessons learned. During the past year, my bar is covering up my slide. What important lessons did we learn? From our best results and from our biggest disappointments, right? So reflecting on the past year in particular, again, should provide us with some fodder for planning for new opportunities and sustainability. And then finally, risk resources. Have we made an appropriate commitment in terms of our personnel time and our financial resources to understand the risks we face and make adjustments as needed? Well, you're here, so that's a really important first step. I find this subject pretty slippery, and it would be very easy to go down the rabbit hole and never come up, to analyze everything in such minute detail that you never have time to do anything at all. The risk is that you'll get so bogged down in risk management, right? But by focusing on the magnitude and the likelihood of certain events happening, categorizing the areas in our own programming that seem most in need or have the most potential, we can find ways to better prepare. All right, switching gears here. If you've been on a board boot camp or an accreditation or a standards and practices session with me, you know how much I love the concept of buckets to help organize our thinking around and talk about the main areas of land trust professional practice. And the buckets, of course, relate to the land trust standards and practices, which is a series of principles acknowledged as best practices by the land trust community. The standards and practices form the basis of our national land trust accreditation program, and adhering to a subset of these practice elements is required for attaining accreditation. So the standards and practices can be roughly grouped into two main parts. Standards 1 through 7 are things that apply to all nonprofit organizations, and standards 8 through 12 are things particular to the conservation work of land trusts. And there are 12 standards total, but really they cover 4 main areas, which are buckets. of practice: governance, finance, and those are both in the realm of things that apply to all nonprofits, and land transactions or acquisitions on this slide, and stewardship, which are in the realm of things that are particular to land trusts. So we're going to use the buckets in this series as we talk about risks and risk management strategies that are particular to each area. Okay, time for me to stop talking for a little bit and hear from you. What are, and I'm gonna take off the screen sharing so that we can see each other and raise hands. But what are some of the risks that you can think of in these bucket areas? And we'll go through governance, finance, transactions, stewardship, and programs. Okay, so hold on. And maybe the easiest way to do this, Tim, I see your hand, but only because I can see you and you've got your video on. I think it would be maybe easiest if we use the toolbar at the bottom of our screens, right, where it says reactions, to select the option raise hand. And that way, you know, we can select from people who have volunteered to talk about some of the risks. So, Tim, would you unmute yourself, and do you have an example of a risk that's in the governance bucket?
No, more so in stewardship.
Okay, let's take stewardship first then.
Okay, so we manage at Hampton Land Conservation Trust. We manage about 75 acres, and stewardship's always been an issue. You know, so we have to take care of, you know, blowdowns and things like that. So one of the risk aspects that we came up with was a chainsaw policy. You know, if a member were to be injured with a chainsaw. We had an example where during a work party, a volunteer brought a chainsaw onto the property and said, "Oh, I'll cut some stuff down." And I wasn't there at the time, but, you know, it raised a few eyebrows, which kind of brought up this chainsaw policy. But the other question is, you know, besides something as, you know, inherently risky as a chainsaw, is, you know, volunteers getting injured during a work party, you know, whether it's using tools or whatever, you know. So these are some of our concerns.
Yeah, good. Anyone else with another stewardship related risk? Rick.
Yeah, we just had a discussion at Avalonia. We've got a few properties that have old wells in them, and we're wondering whether signage will be sufficient enough to warn people about the danger, or whether we have to actually cover up the wells. And in some cases, it would be difficult to get a actual concrete wellhead to the site because of where they're located.
Yeah, that sounds, I don't know, that sounds pretty worrisome. I'm thinking of that guy's face on the slide. Vic says, yep. How about an acquisitions related risk? Anyone got an example of that? Mike?
Sure. I was raising my hand for stewardship, but so if for instance you don't know about all the due diligence that you should be doing when you're acquiring a property, either in fee or a donation or whatever, for instance, the environmental assessment, there could be some pretty nasty stuff hiding on a property. Maybe someone has another idea.
What about you, Lee? I saw your hand go up. Maybe something that Mike said spurred a thought. Are you still on mute somehow? No. Mm-mm.
Now?
Yeah.
No. Now, yeah. Okay. My concern is the reverse, that as a land trust, we may be sitting on some resources that we have retained over the years and from various sources, and sort of this vague risk that we may be sued and someone may want to encroach on our properties. And I'm wondering, as time goes by and properties are not acquired and they get developed and they get subdivided, and we see more and more of that here in the Northeast, that before long there's nothing left to preserve. So I think we have a lot of aging landowners that are very willing to make some conservation-minded decisions with their property. But if we're not willing to step up and take them up on that and acquire those properties and protect them, then I think that we may be missing an opportunity, because we are so risk averse relative to people wanting to encroach, shall we say, on preserved property. So I have sort of like the flip side concern on risk.
Very interesting. What are we giving up if we don't do something because we're too risk averse? And what kinds of strategies can we put in place to manage some of the worst case scenarios and make sure that we move away from those Class A's and the Class B's? Priscilla, do you have another transactions one, or do you want to jump into the realm of financial risk?
No, I had another stewardship one, which was just not stewardship, sorry, acquisition. We lost a property at Flanders because we were concerned about the risk. It was an old farm and the state had several sites on it flagged as old dumps, and we could not assess what was there without spending significant funds, and someone else came in and bought the property before we did that. But it was our concern about the risk of these unknown dumps in the backwoods of a farm, and who might have been given permission to dump what there. That risk is what slowed us down.
Yeah. Those are all really good ones. And I'm sure they resonate a lot with, the people on this call. Who's got a risk related to financial management or to governance?
I do. How do you put your hand up?
Well,
It's
who's
that
talking?
one.
Valerie? Why don't you just go ahead?
I think this is more in the realm of governance. We had a situation, our land trust is set up to lease back some land, but it never occurred to us until recently that a farmer or someone may want to rent with livestock on our property. And in this particular circumstance, it was unusual in that he was a direct abutter. There wasn't any property in between, and he had a business also going with bees. And he wanted to, and he was growing beefers. He was raising beefers. And he wanted to expand his land for the beefers and rent our land. I'm not sure if we handled it properly because we lost out on the rental, in that we got into making sure that his stock was vaccinated against rabies. And he didn't want to do that. He was not advised, but it was suggested by another farmer that he didn't have to spend the money on doing the rabies shot. He had all the other shots. There's some sort of try something or other. Did I lose you? There we go. So in the long run, he decided not to lease from us. Our concern was that, the land was open. Our land is open to the public, and there's no there's no barrier between his land and our land. And we were concerned, you know, if people were going onto the property and they saw these cows and calves, actually, because he was raising beefers, right there, they would want to pet them and take shots of them like most people on a Sunday drive want to do. Except our land was predominantly wooded. It's in an area that has very low development. So there's a lot of wildlife running through, and the cattle are not separated from that wildlife. So we asked that he have them vaccinated. And like I said, we lost out in the long run because he didn't want to do that. And I'm not quite sure how I should have handled that, or the board, if there was another way, or we just should have ignored the rabies risk. I don't know. So I'm
It's
sort of
not, you know, that's not an easy one to answer. And actually, I'm not even sure if I would categorize that as a stewardship risk related to land management, or a risk that is related to programs, or maybe a governance risk. So we kind of have to move along. So I'm sorry if, you know, if any of you have a really good example of a risk that you'd like to share. Save it for, you know, the area appropriate part of the session as we go forward. But just to give you a few, you know, really common snippets, risks that are related to financial management, of course, your internal financial controls, so the risk of embezzlement or, you know, accidental loss of funds because of insufficient financial controls, a governance-related risk. The easiest one that pops to my mind is our risk of, you know, the risks that we encounter when we don't have sufficient new influx of board members, you know, the risk to the sustainability of our organization if we're not renewing and engaging people in the governance of our organization. So thank you for participating in that exercise with me. I'm going to go back to this worried looking guy who is almost consumed with risk. And let's talk about something a little bit more comforting. So one of the best ways, or a very common way that we probably all do to engage in risk management, is through the purchase of insurance. And we'll talk about insurance in each session, the areas of insurance that are appropriate for each of those buckets. But because insurance is such a huge part of protecting against high magnitude loss, I put a slide in here just to quickly review the major kinds of insurance we might need in our work. Please keep in mind that I'm not an expert, and I think that the best plan is always to talk with an agent or you know, your rep to understand your current insurance coverage, your organization's particular needs, and your exposures, and the expense of participating in certain types of coverage as weighed against the potential costs of not participating, right? Because the concept of insurance is a risk sharing mechanism, right? Or a risk transfer. It's when the organization shares the responsibility and the cost that is associated with a downside risk, a risk of loss. And the purchase of insurance is a means of risk transfer that assigns the financial responsibility for losses to the insurer, right? So the best risk assessment management program, all the things that we're going to talk about, the best state recreational use statutes, the best lawyers cannot prevent all lawsuits from happening, and therefore insurance, which, you know, every land trust should have, you know, some of what I've listed, and I just noticed that I left the at least in there. I don't think that all of us have all of these different kinds of insurance, but let's talk about them really briefly. And generally speaking, the greater the need for financial certainty and the continuation of your operations when risk can't be controlled, the more insurance that an organization is likely to need. So as our budgets grow, and our annual budgets grow, the more important insurance is going to be to hedge against some of these risks that we can't control. So I believe that every land trust should have general liability and commercial general liability, directors and officers, D&O definitely, professional liability. If you've got staff, you need workman's comp, and you should have employment practices liability. If you're using automobiles, you might want to consider non-owned auto. You should definitely have coverage for your properties. That's for the person who goes off the cliff or who gets bit by a rabid cow. You want excess and umbrella coverage, right, for any insurance that you run out of. You want coverage that protects your volunteers from random chainsaw accidents. You might want to consider crime and fidelity coverage. You should definitely consider title insurance on properties that you've invested any funds in. And the last on this long list is terra firma conservation defense insurance, which provides insurance against loss of conservation land and easements by offering protection in enforcement actions and title challenges. So that's kind of a meaty list. Do we have any questions on that? I'm almost afraid to ask, really. Like, we have maybe one question if anyone's got any immediate burning question on insurance. Otherwise, call your agent and ask them the question. Anybody? All right. Great. So I just want to spend a moment on figuring out who will join you in this work on your board. And for so many reasons, it's best to have more than one person working on this for your organization. For our series here and the one-on-one assessments that we're offering at the conclusion, we would aim for a team of 3 to 5. And ideally, the members of this group would have different professional and personal perspectives. I would consider including 1 to 3 board members, 1 staff member if your organization has staff, and think about bringing on 1 non-board person, maybe someone who's on a committee or otherwise is a longstanding volunteer, very familiar with your organization, maybe a donor or a landowner, a community leader or official. Each of these people is likely to see the risks facing the organization from a different perspective. And you're going to be looking at this within the specific context within which you work, right? So if you're a single community land trust, the people you put on your team might be different. If you're a land trust focused on a certain resource like farmland, that again would affect your decision making. Maybe consider somebody outside of the organization who has expertise in the area that you focus on. And then finally, you're going to be approaching this work from your organization's tolerance of risks. So you want to avoid a situation where your team is very different from the rest of the board, right? So sometimes we're tempted to get all like-minded individuals into the committees that we're working on. But at the very least, consider the possibility that your team may be vastly different from the majority on your board, and you're going to need to, whatever you come up with, if your risk tolerance is vastly different from what the rest of the board is, you're going to have a bit of a struggle trying to sell your plan to the rest of the board. Any questions there? And it would be better maybe if you speak out because I can't see the entire grid at this point. Okay. All right, well, so our schedule is to focus in on risks that are common to land trusts in accordance with those buckets. So it might be the case, once you put together this team, that different members of your team will get more out of attending certain of the sessions, but not all of the sessions. Next week, we're going to take on governance and finance. So that's going to be a pretty information dense session, but focusing on those areas only, the nonprofit organization buckets that deal more with internal operations and organizational capacity and sustainability. On November 1st, we're going to do land transactions and risks associated with that area. November 8th, moving on to stewardship, but also programming, including some of the newer areas that land trusts have been exploring to better serve their communities and a broad public. So this would be, including things like collaborating with new groups or developing new kinds of public access, the risks of doing that and the risks of not doing that. And then someone from your organization should be at, someone should be at each of these sessions, but it would be really great if the entire team could come to the final session on November 15th, when we'll demonstrate and play with the Terra Firma risk management course and interactive tool.
Connie, it's not uncommon for finance committees to take on insurance. And given the fact that there's a limit to how many committees a board can sustain, is that a common thing among land trusts or not?
I've seen insurance within finance committees and within governance committees.
Okay.
And so I don't think it's uncommon at all. Also, yeah, this is probably not your question, Scott, but just to be clear, we're not going to only talk about insurance in these sessions. So we'll be talking about risk mitigation.
Well, I said insurance, I meant risk management.
Oh, well, I mean, to me, I would bring that outside of the finance committee to the extent that the finance committee may not understand some of the risks associated with things, pertaining to land transactions and to stewardship and to governance, frankly, and programming. So, it really depends on the organization, I would say. But just going back to the slide where we looked at like the ideal team, you do want people who are both knowledgeable of the subject area, but also have diverse perspectives. And a finance committee may have a more or less risk averse, the threshold may be
Right.
different and center around financial, opportunities and loss. And so that is just really one angle to look at it from. All right, I think I was going to hand this slide over to Jen.
Thanks. So I just wanted to share with you, during each of these sessions, we will have time and slides dedicated to resources that have been developed or compiled by the Land Trust Alliance. Most of them are available on the Learning Center and are provided to members as part of their member benefits. But I just wanted to also let you know that we'll be sending out these slides following the session. So you'll have the links to these different resources here. One in particular of interest is that members of the Alliance also have an affiliate membership with the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, which means that you can access their e-news. They have a really great risk management magazine, webinars. They have a conference. So that's a really great risk management resource that's available to you. And then we have a basic risk management webinar that's presented by Lori Barrett, who's our Conservation Defense Associate Director. Terra Firma has an online risk management planner that we'll be talking about more in these sessions, especially in the last session, but I wanted to call out for you in case you're interested in exploring that now. And then we have a guide to risk management that kind of walks through that planner and helps you assess risk as well, which, we'll be talking about that during the last session as well. But it provides an overview as well. So I think that was it, Connie, back to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just taking the opportunity to check into chat while you were speaking, and so I see that that Christopher Shepard reminded us all that cybersecurity is another kind of insurance that's becoming more and more important. You know, I worry every day because I haven't had you know, an organizational hacking yet. But I fear it, and I think that tech in nonprofits it's another area where, you know, probably in comparison to some of our corporate counterparts, we're not as far ahead, or we haven't dedicated the resources that we perhaps should to shoring up our files and to making sure that we are secure in our file systems and in our tech. So so my feelings on that are anxiety. How about that, Chris? My feelings on that are that probably it is something that, especially as time goes on, we're all going to have to worry about a whole lot more. And I also saw the request for a list of common risks, and that is something that I will try my best to develop you know, as we go forward on these topical sessions. But if nothing else, I mean, if you feel like you thought you knew what you were talking about and now it's even more nebulous, that's kind of what risk management is all about, because it's more about choices than absolutes. And so to have a list of common risks is really helpful for teasing the brain about how to analyze risks. But you're going to make your own choices, you know, based on your board's collective risk threshold, you know, your appetite for that risk, and also on where it plays out for your particular organization on that spectrum of the likelihood of it happening, the magnitude of the impact, if it does or doesn't happen, and, you know, whether or not it's a good risk or a bad risk. I pulled out, this next slide is just a few more upcoming you know, programs on risk management if you get really into it. And so these are some webinars upcoming offered by the Land Trust Alliance, one in November, one in December, and then a couple in January. And I would expect that they'd add some, you know, even some more next year. And then finally, this slide is a call out to share your burning questions in advance of our sessions, so that we can make sure to cover, you know, the risks that you're worried about. And so, you know, I don't know, Jen and Rebecca, if you had any thoughts about how people might want to do this, but my sense is that, you know, if someone has a burning question about stewardship, that they needn't wait, that they should go ahead and send it. We will address it in, you know, the fourth session, but please send, I think, your questions as you're thinking of them.
Yeah, and I'm happy to collect those just for sake of ease. So you can feel free to email those to me or to copy all of us. It's up to you. And just let us know if you'd prefer to remain anonymous or not.
I'm going to stop sharing. You know, we are at 7, but you know, in case there are any burning questions that can be posed but not answered necessarily tonight, or quick questions that we can answer about the program and the format for the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, I have one point, and I'm not looking really for an answer. My name is Christian Brackman. I'm fairly new to this group, and I'm from the Dairy and Land Trust. And actually, my colleague, who's the executive secretary, Beth Harmon, she's also on. And she recommended I look at this because I'm on our governance committee, and I'm biased towards reputational risk. And that's why I want to raise my hand, because all 4 risk buckets that you identified tonight are all of strong interest for our reputation. And I feel our reputation is really critical in the town of Darien. And I think it's in most towns, especially small towns where you have a land trust. The land trust has a very strong feel-good factor about it. We hear about preservation and almost like, you know, something of great value to the town. It keeps it beautiful. Our land trust board is made up of, I would say, very savvy individuals. A lot of them have a Wall Street background, have been quite successful either in finance or in the law or in marketing. So when issues arise, they typically raise them. And there's some older people that really are not shy about internally on the board raising them. But I've been on that board for like 3 or 4 years now, and I've seen a few things. And they cover all these areas, but specifically really on stewardship. And if anything that gets in the area of a potential mismatch between what we say we do and what we do with our properties. And an example is when there was somebody mowing the lawn on a designated property in a way that was not consistent with the stewardship rules set out. This raised a lot of eyebrows on my head because I'm a reputational risk person. I really didn't like to hear that. And so that's on the negative side. On the positive side, we had a couple of years ago a presentation from somebody representing an organization with the plastic bags versus the paper bags, and it was very poorly presented, but I liked the idea a lot. I think most of the board was very enthusiastic about their mission, but it was so poorly organized that we all, we withdrew very quickly from the opportunity to associate ourselves on a positive side with that organization. So we don't do any partnerships with any of these organizations. We feel recently we could maybe do more with, the flooding. Our town has a lot of flooding. The work we do to preserve properties is, of course, critical in mitigating that. And again, we don't take any public stand. We're very, very risk averse in the public area. And so I just wanted to raise my hand here to say, for me personally, the reputational risk is something that is of strong interest. And I think for all these volunteer organizations, they stand by the goodwill they have with the community. So maybe in this overall assessment, you can also spend a little bit of time on the reputational elements of all of these factors. But again, noting that Darien, we are in very good shape. We have no real issues here, but it's, we don't want to get complacent. We are very strong finance, very strong governance. But again, any mismatch between what we say we do and what we do with our properties could be over time a risk. And it all ties to governance, stewardship, all these areas. So thank you for that. And yeah, again, I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just trying to share why I'm joining this call and why Beth recommended. That's one of the reasons why Beth recommended I'll take a look at it. And it's a strong interest to us. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christian. Thank you.
I have to pipe in. It's Beth Harmon with the Darien Land Trust with my often quote, "We don't know what we don't know." And just because we've been doing things and we're tight on everything and buttoned up, and especially in an area where people do pride themselves with their expertise in mostly good ways. But again, that also goes in the direction of the one person is speaking and everyone else is nodding their heads. And that's kind of a psychological factor that I think happens on all boards. But our land trust is in a state of maturity. I think there's other land trusts that are in the same position. So to think that we're just, all tight as a tighten I feel the same way about that as someone does about cybersecurity, because I open paper files and paper crumbling and the fact that they're not scanned and we have not really a proper airtight stewardship database, that keeps me up. And we're not accredited. And other land trusts aren't as well. So I think, any guidance about that, as people on our board that have been part of a lot of these transactions question if they are airtight, and that we need to make sure. So who's going to do that on a all volunteer board?
And one thing to point out is, and especially in this discipline that we've all just entered into, is that really, there should not be a situation where you are 100% airtight. We all have risk and we're all living with some risk. And if you're 100% airtight, no risk at all, then you're probably missing out on some opportunities. And so, the point of this session is to kind of lay it all out there so that can help us to say, what risks are, what risks are so big, that we have to do something about them, that we couldn't stomach, having them come to pass. And so we do have to, take management steps like purchasing insurance, like putting policies in place, to manage those risks. And what are we missing out on if we don't take certain risks? And so if we go ahead and give ourselves permission to either ignore risks entirely or to take certain risks, what do we need to do to feel comfortable with that?
Thank you.
All right, well, I will leave you all with that thought. Thank you very much for tuning in to be with us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all next Monday, where we can talk about governance and finance. And please come with your questions. And, even if they're not about governance and finance, please send your questions in advance to Rebecca so that we can start to collect that list.